Wait, put that down. The words cut through the peaceful atmosphere of clinking dishes and gentle jazz music at the garden bistro, sharp as a blade through silk on that late morning. Every head swiveled. Mid-sentence conversations died instantly. A utensil dropped against porcelain with a sharp ring. At a table positioned in the center of the outdoor terrace, shaded by an ivory umbrella, Charles Hale froze with his spoon barely an inch from his mouth. The 74-year-old was a cornerstone of Los Angeles high society, a real estate empire builder, former Navy officer, and charitable benefactor who spoke softly but commanded respect. His perfectly tailored charcoal blazer and pale blue checkered shirt spoke of a man with nothing left to accomplish. Across from him sat Veronica Hale, his wife of 4 decades his junior, breathtaking in every sense. Her form-fitting ivory dress perfectly complemented the table's linens, while her perfectly manicured nails caught the light with quiet elegance. Her smartphone lay face up beside her soup bowl, lighting up with a notification. She didn't even glance at it. Just past the wrought iron barrier surrounding the cafe's outdoor seating, a young figure lingered, skinny, dark-complexioned, with his hood partially raised despite the mild spring weather. His shoes didn't match, the left one, held together with string instead of proper laces. Yet his eyes, wide, vigilant, and intense, remained locked on one target: Charles Hale's bowl of carrot bisque. 13-year-old Eli Carter hadn't eaten a proper meal in longer than he cared to remember. When food came his way, it disappeared, quickly, sometimes salvaged from dumpsters behind food trucks, other times bartered for cigarettes he'd never use. He understood the unspoken rule about avoiding places like this. The garden bistro wasn't meant for someone like him, but today, the aroma of roasted garlic and melted butter had drawn him closer than usual, so close he could practically taste it. That's when he witnessed it. Veronica's hand slipped into her luxury purse, fingers gliding past her wallet and makeup, until they found something small. A miniature vial, transparent, unmarked. She removed the cap with practiced ease and angled her hand just so. The liquid poured into the steaming bowl in such a thin, deliberate stream that it might have escaped notice entirely. It would have, if Eli hadn't been watching with laser focus. She stirred the soup with graceful, unhurried movements. Her face betrayed nothing, but then she leaned across the table, her words barely audible, yet clear enough for a boy with keen hearing and survival instincts honed by necessity. After everything I've invested in this, you won't destroy it now. Eli's pulse quickened. Something ancient within him, wisdom beyond his years forged by hardship, awakened. For several heartbeats, he remained motionless. Who would take his word? He was nothing more than a starving kid. Street trash, as the uniformed officials sometimes called him under their breath. He surveyed the scene. Servers balancing trays, business people absorbed in their phones, a woman cackling too loudly at her own joke. Nobody else had noticed. Nobody else had seen. His empty stomach cramped, reminding him he could simply walk away, act like he'd witnessed nothing, mind his own business. Then Officer Jimenez's words echoed in his memory. The one security guard who'd treated him like a human being. True bravery, he'd said while sharing half his sandwich, happens when nobody's watching you do it. Charles reached for his spoon again. Eli's body reacted before his mind could catch up. He pushed through the patio gate, the latch clicking far too loudly, and marched directly toward their table. Each step felt like moving through thick mud, weighted down by invisible chains. Wait, put that down. Charles went rigid, spoon suspended. In mid-air, Veronica's head whipped around. What did you just say? Her voice had an edge like broken glass. Eli's throat constricted, but somehow the words emerged. Don't drink it. She added something to your soup. I watched her do it. Shocked whispers spread across the patio like ripples. Veronica rose slowly, her practiced smile vanishing completely. You lying little brat, she spat, loud enough for everyone to overhear. Who allowed you in here? Someone call security. But Eli held his ground. She pulled something from her bag, a small bottle, clear glass, Poured it in while you were distracted by your phone. He gestured toward the soup, then her purse. You can detect it if you smell carefully. You don't need to trust me, just investigate. Charles studied the boy intently, then turned to his wife. Her complexion had drained of color, lips compressed into a thin, hard line. Veronica. His voice was barely above a whisper. She forced a brittle laugh. Charles, honestly, this is ridiculous. He's obviously some vagrant seeking attention. Perhaps food or money. Why are we even dignifying this? The boy's voice grew stronger. I don't want anything from you. His hands clenched into fists. But if you consume that soup, you'll pay the price. I guarantee it. Something in his tone, not panic, but unwavering determination, made Charles slowly place the spoon back on. The table. The quiet stretched on, thick as coastal fog on winter mornings. The maitre d' stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, shall I contact the authorities? Veronica spun toward him, eyes wide. What? Absolutely not. This is harassment, pure and simple. Charles never looked away from Eli. Yes, he said quietly. Make the call. In that instant, as staff members scattered and the city continued its rhythm beyond the fence, Eli Carter straightened his shoulders. The smallest figure present, yet somehow commanding the room's attention. He couldn't predict what would happen next. But one thing was crystal clear. He'd come too far to remain silent now. You misunderstood him, Veronica declared, her voice tightening like a piano string under too much tension. That child is clearly disturbed. But nobody moved. The atmosphere in the garden bistro had become electrically charged, crackling with disbelief, fascination, and something else nobody wanted to acknowledge out loud. Doubt. Charles Hale hadn't touched his spoon again. He settled back in his chair, his sharp gray eyes fixed on his wife. Not with fury, not yet, but with a cold, methodical assessment. The expression of someone who'd learned through experience when the numbers didn't add up. Across from him, Eli Carter stood motionless. His chest rose and fell from the adrenaline surge, but his gaze remained steady. No stutter in his speech, no hint of deception. Just a 13-year-old kid, worn but defiant, standing within arm's reach of power while pointing at a crime that hadn't yet occurred. The maitre d' had disappeared inside to phone the police, and several diners discreetly began filming with their devices. Forks remained suspended. Normal conversation had died completely. I observed her remove a small vial from her handbag. Eli repeated, his voice unwavering. It resembled those tiny medicine containers. Transparent. She emptied it in, then stirred, like nothing had happened. He looked directly at Charles. You were focused on your phone. You missed it. Veronica released a high, practiced laugh, the kind women rehearse in private. Charles, sweetheart, please. This is a child. He's confused, or hungry, or both. Can we just— I'm not confused, Eli interrupted firmly, and I'm not after your money. I simply couldn't stand by and watch you die. Her mask slipped. Just for a moment, something flickered across her features. Not fear, not guilt. Pure rage. Charles caught it instantly. You've been acting strangely lately, he said slowly, still avoiding the soup. Withdrawn, preoccupied. He turned to face her fully, speaking not with volume but with weight. And now this. Veronica's voice dropped as if hoping to speak beneath the crowd's attention. Are you seriously going to believe some street rat over your own wife? Eli didn't budge. Test the soup. Smell it. Get it analyzed. I'm not asking you to believe me. Just don't ignore the evidence. A server, visibly shaking, stepped closer. Sir, if I may. He leaned over and inhaled. His eyebrows drew together. There's definitely something unusual about the aroma. Veronica slammed her palm against the table. Have you all lost your minds? He's manipulating every one of you. He probably contaminated it himself when we weren't paying attention. Charles's face paled, but not from fear, from recognition. He looked back at the boy. What's your name? Eli. Family name? Carter? Have you done this before? Eli blinked, in surprise. No, sir. I've never been in a situation like this, but I know what I witnessed. And what would be her motive? Eli paused. I have no idea. His voice softened. But whatever her reasons, it doesn't change what I saw. Veronica drew herself to full height, her words dripping with venom. I've been devoted to you. I supported you through your surgery recovery. I remained when everyone else treated you like yesterday's news. Charles didn't even flinch. That wasn't devotion, that was damage control. She went rigid. Excuse me? He reached for the spoon again, not to eat, but to examine it. His hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from memory. Questioning trust cuts deeper than betrayal itself. It settles into your bones. He addressed a waiter. Bring me a fresh spoon. No, Veronica barked. Then, realizing how loud she'd become, she modulated her tone. Please, Charles, you don't need to prove anything. This is absurd. Don't embarrass us both. You mean don't embarrass you? Charles said, drawing gasps from neighboring tables. Eli stood quietly, fists still clenched. I didn't want to destroy your life, he said softly. But I wasn't going to stand by and watch you lose it either. Then, like a thread finally snapping under pressure, Veronica cracked. You don't understand. I sacrificed everything for you. You think this was about love? She laughed bitterly. You were never supposed to survive this long. The moment crystallized. Someone's glass shattered against the ground. Charles's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. What did you just say? Her face turned ghostly white. I didn't mean. That's not what I. Footsteps approached from behind. 2 LAPD officers entered the patio area, hands resting casually on their utility belts. Sir, ma'am, one announced, we received a report about possible poisoning. Veronica turned to them quickly. It's all a misunderstanding. That boy, he's unstable, probably under the influence of something. You can't trust anything he claims. Charles didn't even blink. The soup is right there. I want it tested immediately. The officer nodded and moved forward. But as he reached for the bowl, Don't! Veronica snapped, stepping between them. It was too late. The hesitation, the panic, the misplaced authority in her voice. Everyone saw it. The cameras captured it. The officer's brow furrowed. Ma'am, if there's nothing to conceal, there's no reason to interfere. I didn't mean. Charles stood slowly, taller than he appeared seated, steadier than he'd felt in years. You meant every single word, he said. From the moment you chose that bottle, you meant it. Veronica looked around desperately, but no one would meet her gaze. The whispers had transformed into certainties. She glanced at Eli. You little monster. He didn't flinch. I saw what I saw, he said simply. And I wasn't going to let you succeed. The officer stepped forward again. Ma'am, I'm placing you under investigative detention pending toxicology results. Please show me your hands. Veronica backed away. You don't understand. He's ruined everything. No, Charles said, his voice like gravel. You did that yourself. As the handcuffs locked around her wrists, Veronica let out a shriek that sent nearby birds fleeing from the trees. The diners sat in stunned silence. No one clapped. No one celebrated. They simply watched. Eli turned to leave quietly. His part was finished. He hadn't stayed for gratitude, but before he could exit the patio, Charles called after him. Eli. The boy stopped. Where exactly do you think you're going? Eli turned slowly. I'm not sure, sir. Then sit down, Charles said, indicating the empty chair across from him. We can start there. And for the first time in what seemed like forever, Eli Carter took a seat at a table where nobody told him to leave. The silver handcuffs caught the midday sunlight as the officers escorted Veronica past the stunned diners. She attempted to maintain her dignity, but her eyes darted frantically, searching for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. No one did, not even Charles. He remained in his seat, his hand resting gently near the table's edge, inches from the untouched bowl of soup. Its surface had cooled completely. The faint swirls of color no longer appeared appetizing. In its stillness, it resembled something entirely different. A trap that had failed to spring. A silence that could have lasted forever. Eli sat across from him now, knees drawn together, shoulders tense. He seemed smaller somehow, despite everything he'd just accomplished. Perhaps because the phase where people start demanding answers had begun. One of the officers, a middle-aged black man with compassionate but weary eyes, turned to Charles. "We'll need to send this soup for toxicology analysis. There's a lab downtown that handles these cases quickly." Charles nodded. "Do it, and ensure you document the chain of custody properly. I want everything handled officially." The officer carefully transferred the bowl into a secure container that his partner had brought. Veronica's screams had faded into the distance, absorbed by the bistro's glass entrance doors. The remaining patrons began murmuring again. Some whispered among themselves. Others continued recording. A few quietly rose to leave. But one table of elderly women remained, their hands clutching their purses, lips pressed tight, watching not because of the scandal but because of the boy. Eli shifted uncomfortably. "Can I go now?" Charles studied him carefully. "Is that what you want?" "I don't fit in here," the boy murmured. "Never have." Charles didn't respond immediately. He turned his attention toward the cafe's fence where Eli had first appeared. A gentle breeze rustled the nearby shrubs. The fountain beyond continued its peaceful bubbling, as if the world hadn't nearly shattered just 10 minutes earlier. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You were the only person who recognized something was wrong. Out of everyone here, servers, managers, diners with advanced degrees and expensive watches, you were the only one who took action." Eli looked away. "Yeah, and she called me a liar." "She called you that because she was terrified of what you knew," Charles said. "People like her hide behind manners and appearances, but underneath they're more desperate than you could imagine." The boy hesitated. "Why would she want to harm you?" Charles didn't answer right away. When he spoke, it was slower this time, as if the words carried more weight than he wanted to bear. "Veronica married me because I represented something to her. Power, security, a shortcut to success." "You didn't know?" "I did," he admitted. "But sometimes loneliness feels more threatening than a poor choice, especially when you're old enough to recognize the difference." Eli didn't grasp all of it, but he understood enough. The officer who'd taken the soup returned. "We've sent it off. Should have preliminary results by this evening." He looked at Charles. "Sir, you might want to consider filing formal charges." Given her confession, "She'll have her day in court," Charles said simply. Eli stood up. "You don't need me anymore." "Sit," Charles said more gently than before. "Please." The boy complied, though reluctantly. "I have a question for you," Charles continued. "How long have you been living on the streets?" Eli didn't answer at first. His eyes flicked to the waiter now cleaning crumbs from a nearby table, then to the empty chair where Veronica had been sitting. Finally he muttered, "Since my mom died, 2 years." Charles exhaled through his nose. "Any relatives?" "Nobody I'd trust." "Do you trust me?" "I didn't say that," Eli replied. "I just didn't want you to die. That doesn't mean I trust you." Charles nodded slowly. "Fair point." There was a long pause. The wind picked up. A napkin danced across the patio stones. "Do you know what justice feels like, Eli?" Charles finally asked. The boy shook his head. "It's not loud. It's not satisfying. It doesn't shout or celebrate when it wins." He looked down at where his soup bowl had been. "Justice is quiet. It's surviving something you weren't supposed to survive. It's the taste of a meal you didn't consume." Eli's voice was barely audible. "Then why does it still feel so heavy?" "Because truth always costs something," Charles said, "even when you're right." From inside, a waiter approached carrying a phone. "Sir, your assistant is calling. Wants to know if you're okay." Charles took it, stood, and walked a few steps away. Eli sat alone, running his fingers along the table's edge. The conversation was muted, but the old man's posture had changed, straightened, sharpened. He returned 2 minutes later and set the phone down. "I've made arrangements," he said. "There's someone I trust, George Whitmore. He runs a youth center in Echo Park. He's coming here now. You'll spend tonight there." Eli's eyebrows knitted together. "I didn't ask for help." "You didn't have to." Charles's expression softened. "Listen, you didn't save my life because you wanted something in return. That's what makes what you did extraordinary. I just couldn't walk away from something that felt wrong." "And that," Charles said, tapping the table gently with one finger, "is the first instinct of an honorable person." Eli didn't respond immediately, but for the first time in a very long while, he didn't feel the urge to run. In the distance, sirens wailed again, this time far off, someone else's emergency, someone else's crisis. Inside the cafe, the manager placed a new reservation sign on the table beside theirs. It read, "Reserved for Mr. C. Hale." The man nodded respectfully to Charles. Eli glanced at the sign, then at the glass of water in front of him. He took a small sip. "Cool? Clean? Is it strange," he asked suddenly, "that I'm not afraid anymore?" Charles shook his head. "No, it just means you finally allowed yourself to sit still." The boy didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed just a little. And outside the fence where he once stood alone, the world continued its pace, but now with one more boy inside, and one less mask at the table. By the time the final guest departed the Garden Bistro that afternoon, the sun had begun its gradual descent behind the skyline, painting long shadows across the patio stones. What had once served as a sanctuary for hushed business discussions and leisurely brunches had in just a few hours become something entirely different. A courtroom, a battlefield, a stage for a boy the world had forgotten. Eli sat on the edge of a cushioned bench just inside the cafe, now closed to the public. He'd been moved in from the patio at Charles's quiet suggestion, given a plate of roasted chicken, green beans, and cornbread that remained untouched. Hunger had been his constant companion for years, but now, oddly enough, he had no desire to eat. Across the room, Charles Hale stood near the fireplace, speaking in hushed tones with George Whitmore, the director from Echo Park Youth Shelter. George was a broad-shouldered black man in his 50s, dressed in an open denim shirt and khaki pants, the kind of man who'd weathered his own storms and decided to build shelter for others. "I'll keep him safe," George said firmly. "No media, no pressure. Just stability, regular meals, some counseling, maybe even school again if he's interested." Charles nodded. "And if he wants more?" George offered a quiet smile. "Then we find a way." Charles looked over at Eli. The boy sat with his arms resting on the table, staring at nothing in particular, as if still deciding whether he belonged in the room or was just visiting. "He's got something inside him," Charles murmured. "Steel. Most people don't discover that until it's too late." George followed his gaze. "That's because most people never had to carry what he has." There was a pause between them, not filled with silence, but with understanding. Then Charles walked over and sat beside Eli. He didn't speak at first, just looked down at the untouched plate. "Not hungry?" Eli shrugged. I don't know, just tired, I guess." Charles didn't push. Instead, he leaned back and let the fire's warmth reach his hands. "When I was your age," he began, "I stole canned peaches from a corner store in Milwaukee. Got caught. The owner was a World War II veteran. Scared the hell out of me." Eli looked at him, eyebrows raised. "What did he say?" Charles continued. "He told me, 'You steal peaches, you're hungry. You steal twice, you're angry. Third time, you're not stealing. You're becoming something else.' That stuck with me." Eli turned away again. "I'm not becoming anything." Charles let the moment settle before speaking again. "You already have." From behind them, George approached. "Hey kid, you ready? Got a bed with clean sheets waiting for you. No curfews tonight." Eli hesitated, glancing at Charles. "Am I in trouble?" No, Charles said. You're in transition. Eli stood slowly, the day's stiffness evident in every movement. But just before he stepped away, he turned back. Why are you helping me? You didn't have to. Charles's answer came without hesitation. Because when you spoke the truth, you stood alone. I've been wealthy long enough to know how rare that is. Eli nodded once. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes, something tight and guarded, relaxed just a little. As George led him toward the exit, Charles called after him. Eli! The boy turned. Charles reached into his pocket and pulled out a small round object. He walked over and placed it in Eli's palm. A worn bronze Navy challenge coin. Eli turned it over in his hand. What's this for? Proof, Charles said, that you did something brave. When you're older and people try to tell you who you are, hold on to that. Let it remind you of the day you didn't back down. Eli held it like it was fragile. Thanks. And then he was gone. The doors closed. The fireplace crackled. Outside, the city exhaled again. Later that evening, Charles sat alone at his kitchen table. Not the long, formal one in the dining hall of his penthouse, but the smaller wooden table near the back window, where he once shared coffee with his late first wife, before life became a series of quarterly reports and television interviews. On the counter sat the lab report from the police, positive for a lethal dose of amobarbital, tasteless, odorless, confirmed. There would be trials, attorneys, media circus, but none of that weighed on him now. What stayed with him was the image of a boy standing barefoot on a stone patio, voice cracking but spine straight, speaking a truth no one had asked him to carry. He picked up his phone, scrolled to his assistant's number, and dictated a message. Start the paperwork. I'm establishing a foundation. The Eli Carter Trust. Initial endowment, $10 million. Mission, protect and elevate children who've been forgotten. There was a long pause before he hit send. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a second Navy coin, and set it gently on the table beside his glass. He stared at it for a while, a reminder that justice had found its voice that day. And it didn't come from money or influence or courtroom power. It came from a boy nobody saw who spoke anyway. News of the attempted poisoning spread like spilled ink, fast, irreversible, and staining everything it touched. By morning, every major network carried the headline, "Billionaire's wife arrested in alleged murder plot, saved by homeless teen." Photos of Veronica Hale in handcuffs, her face contorted with disbelief, appeared on televisions, smartphones, and the front page. Of the Los Angeles Times talk show hosts speculated endlessly. Political commentators analyzed the class dynamics. Social media exploded with opinions. But amid all the chaos, the one person at the center of it all, Eli Carter, remained silent. He hadn't returned to the streets. He hadn't spoken to journalists. He hadn't sought any spotlight. He was at the Echo Park Youth Shelter, sleeping in a twin bed under a roof that didn't leak. For the first time in years, he had a pillow to himself and no need to sleep with one eye open. On the fourth morning, Charles Hale arrived unannounced. He stepped out of a black Lincoln Navigator, dressed not in a suit but in a navy sweatshirt and jeans. He carried no security detail, no briefcase, just a small brown paper bag and something folded under one arm. George greeted him with a nod and led him through the quiet hallway, past rooms echoing with muffled laughter and cartoon voices. They found Eli alone in the art room, seated at a wooden table near the window, sketching something with a worn pencil. Charles didn't speak immediately. He walked over slowly, watching the boy's hands. They moved with precision, sharpened by survival, but softened by the stillness of safety. "What are you drawing?" Charles asked. Eli looked up. "I don't know yet." "Maybe a bridge." Charles nodded. "Bridges are good. They get people from where they are to where they need to be." He handed Eli the brown paper bag. "Turkey and cheddar. Extra mustard." Eli took it surprised. "You remembered." "I've been forgetful lately," Charles replied. "But not about things that matter." They sat in silence for a moment. the boy unwrapping his sandwich, the man watching dust dance in a beam of sunlight. Then Charles unfolded the item under his arm. A photograph, matted and framed. It showed a young boy barefoot in a wheat field, holding a kite made of newspaper. The photo was black and white, but time hadn't dulled its spirit. "That's me," Charles said. 1958, Wisconsin. My mother took the photo. We couldn't afford toys, so we made them out of whatever we had. Eli studied the picture for a long time. "You were poor. We had more holes in the roof than money in the bank," Charles said. "But I had a mother who saw me, who listened." Eli looked down. "I barely remember mine." Charles leaned forward, his voice quieter now. "I know what it feels like to be invisible, to have the world walk past you like your smoke. But last week you weren't invisible. You were the only one in that cafe who saw the truth and chose to speak it." Eli didn't reply. He stared at his half-eaten sandwich like it was a test he couldn't pass. Charles reached into his pocket and placed something on the table between them, the same Navy Challenge coin. "I want you to keep it," he said. "Not because you saved my life, but because you reminded me what it means to live with honor." Eli touched the coin. "Feels heavy." "It should," Charles said. "It's not just metal. It's everything that came before it. Every choice, every sacrifice." Eli finally looked up. "Why are you here?" "To tell you this. I'm not done helping you. And I'm not doing it out of guilt or pity." He paused. "You're not a project, Eli. You're a person, and someone needs to stand beside you until the world sees that." The boy's throat tightened. He wanted to say thank you, but couldn't find the words. Instead, he just nodded. Charles stood. "I've got something else to show you." He led Eli outside, around the shelter to the back, where a narrow courtyard opened onto a community garden. In the middle stood a new wooden bench beneath a modest metal archway. On the bench, a small bronze plaque had been mounted. It read, "In honor of Eli Carter for choosing truth over silence." Eli stared at it, stunned. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Charles said, "but sometimes the world needs to be reminded that voices like yours matter." A breeze stirred the leaves. A small bird landed on the archway, chirped twice, then fluttered away. Eli sat down on the bench. His hands rested on his knees. For once, they didn't tremble. "Do you think things will ever go back to normal?" he asked. Charles placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I hope not, because what's normal for the world isn't always right." They sat in silence. The older man and the younger boy, each shaped by different battles, each carrying truths they never asked for. But for that moment, they shared something deeper than blood or name, respect. And in that quiet space behind a shelter few knew existed, Eli began to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't ending. It was starting. A week later, in a quiet press room at the Los Angeles Public Library, cameras were rolling. There were no bright stage lights, no red carpets, just a podium, a banner with the city's seal, and a handful of reporters who had expected something more glamorous. But Charles Hale never cared for spectacle. He stood behind the podium, hands resting lightly on either side, dressed in a simple navy suit with no tie. The room quieted. "I don't usually speak publicly anymore," Charles began, his voice deep and steady. "And when I do, it's rarely about personal matters, but today I want to tell you a story. A brief one." He paused, eyes scanning the room. "Last week I nearly died." A few reporters straightened, in their seats. "Not because of old age or illness, but because someone close to me made a choice. A devastating one. And I didn't see it coming. No one did." He adjusted the microphone slightly. "But someone saw. Someone no one expected. A boy, barely 13. No title, no inheritance, no name you'd recognize. But he had eyes wide open and a voice that refused to stay silent." Murmurs rippled across the room. He could have turned away, could have watched from behind the fence where people told him he belonged. But instead, he stepped forward. And in doing so, he reminded me of something I'd forgotten. that courage rarely arrives dressed in power. It shows up in rags, hungry and uncertain, but unwilling to let wrong be called right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. He held it up. A coin. Bronze, scratched, weathered. This is my Navy Challenge coin. I've carried it for decades, through combat, through boardrooms, through loss. I gave it away last week to the only person I've met in years who truly earned it. He lowered the coin slowly, letting the moment breathe. And today, I'm announcing the creation of the Eli Carter Foundation, a $10 million trust to support, educate, and elevate children who are often unseen. Kids who fall between systems, who sleep on benches but dream like kings. Kids who, like Eli, carry truth inside them even when no one asks them to. He took a step back from the microphone. "Justice isn't loud," he said, his voice soft but heavy. "It doesn't always look like victory. It waits. It watches. And when it speaks," his eyes lifted to the crowd, "it doesn't yell. It just doesn't flinch." A beat of silence, then cameras clicked frantically. Reporters scrambled to their feet. Questions flew, but Charles had said what he came to say. He walked out of the room without answering a single question. That evening, while the city digested the speech, Eli sat in the small two-room apartment Charles's team had arranged. It was modest. White walls, second-hand couch, a bookshelf with only 3 titles so far, but it was his. He stood in the kitchen, barefoot on cold tiles, staring at a magnet stuck to the fridge. It was cheap, shaped like California, with a quote in peeling gold print. "It's not where you come from, it's where you're going." He didn't know who put it there. He didn't care. The doorbell rang. Eli opened it cautiously. George stood there with 2 plastic bags of groceries and a wide grin. "Told you I'd drop by." Eli stepped aside, letting him in. "You didn't have to." George set the bags down. People who matter shouldn't have to do everything alone. Eli's eyes flicked toward the living room, where the coin sat on the shelf beside the framed bench plaque Charles had given him. "You think all this will last?" he asked. George looked him in the eye. "That depends. You planning on going backward?" Eli shook his head firmly. "Not ever." "Then yeah," George said. "It'll last."